Greetings. Before starting this story, I recommend subscribing to the Our Days Stories channel. Amanda Diaz heard Charlie making arrangements with a neighbor to go to his house tonight. That meant only one thing: Charlie would drink again, and then he would come home and get rowdy. Amanda Diaz knew that at 75, she could hardly resist the power and aggression of her 20-year-old grandson, so there was no point in fighting him. Several times, the older woman made attempts to wrestle her grandson away from his drinking buddies. Charlie had started drinking when he was 16, and by the time he was 20, he looked like a 40-year-old man worn out by domestic difficulties, but not a healthy young man in his prime. Don't forget the finances. His neighbor Logan, who was in his 50s and loved spending time with Amanda Diaz's grandson, admonished him. Charlie always had money. Of course, he was the one who controlled the finances of the house. He didn't try to work much himself. Now and then he would take part in a harvest or a fisherman's trip to the high seas, get a penny for it, and it would disappear into the cash register of the local store. Charlie could go on a week-long binge after his earnings, and Amanda Diaz could only watch her grandson. The finances would be there. Charlie answered confidently, "You're the one who's always having money problems, and I'm in business." "I know," Logan smiled. Amanda Diaz was disgusted by this dialogue between two drinking buddies. "That's why I'm here. Go ahead and rustle up something to eat as well as drink. Don't you want to rustle?" Charlie inquired angrily. "Me?" he asked angrily. "You don't want to rustle up anything yourself, do you?" Logan's voice changed into a mewling, pleading voice. "You know I had nothing to do with it. Miranda's left me, gone off into the sunset, and I'm the only one spinning around. I don't have a kind grandmother." Amanda Diaz knew that Logan's wife had left him about 2 months ago, taking her 2 children with her. She had done so out of desperation because she could no longer tolerate her husband's drunkenness and violent temper. The children had seen their father's behavior growing up, and they might have taken their cue from his bad behavior, and now, left alone, Logan did nothing but seek out drinking companions to drown his sorrows. One of his best friends with whom he could spend time without harming himself was Charlie. When Logan left, having arranged to meet Charlie for the evening, Amanda Diaz tensed. She could hear her grandson pacing the room, occasionally climbing into the box containing her grandmother's pension, then swearing again. He ran around the room, creaking the floors. "Amanda," he shouted, and the woman flinched. She heard her grandson's quick footsteps approaching and pressed her head into her shoulders. "What is it, son?" she asked in a pitiful voice. Amanda Diaz knew her grandson didn't like it when she raised her voice at him. How many times she had tried to set her grandson on the path of truth, to make an example of his father, who had died after freezing drunk in a snowdrift. But it had only caused Charlie to protest and to refuse to obey his grandmother altogether. She annoyed him with her moralizing, and one day, he ended up shoving the woman, and Amanda flew aside, hitting her head on the edge of her bed. After that incident, the woman never confronted her grandson again. She dutifully gave him her entire pension, silently ate scraps from the table when the party in her own house was over, and ate bread with water the rest of the time. They used to have a farm, chickens, a cow, but they had to sell everything because Amanda's son drank so much that he took everything he saw out of the house. It was from him that Charlie took his example, absorbing the behavior of his father, who had been dead for several years. Amanda herself perceived her grandson as a heavy cross that was left to her after the death of her own son. And yet, once Oscar was her pride and joy. The woman gave birth to Oscar by her beloved husband, who was called to the war almost immediately after his birth. It was the 40s. It was very hard and hungry, but Amanda raised her only son as best she could. Her husband did not return from the war. She received a funeral telegram, which drew a line under the loneliness of the then very young Amanda. After her husband's death, she no longer looked at any man. She was not interested in the fact that feelings and emotions could flare up. She died with her husband and the woman decided to give her whole self to raising her son. Oscar grew up a smart boy, excelled in rural school, helped his mother with household chores, and was her pride and support. Everything changed after the young man decided to get married. He chose a beautiful and clever girl from the village. Rebecca was indeed very beautiful and worthy to be married to one of the most enviable suitors in the village, and Oscar was just such a young lad. There were young girls around him all the time, eager for attention from the young man, but he was preoccupied with his studies as well as the cares of the house. Amanda couldn't help but be proud of her son. They married in the spring, and the following winter, Oscar and Rebecca had a son, Charlie. The young couple's happiness was boundless because Oscar dreamed of an heir, and Rebecca loved her husband and was so happy to please him. They lived separately from their parents on the collective farm. They were given a separate house on the outskirts of the village, but the young people were happy about that. Life flowed smoothly and calmly, and Amanda was just as calm for her son. Their relationship was perfect. Rebecca constantly asked Amanda for advice on how best to prepare this or that dish, so it would be sure Oscar liked it, and her mother-in-law was happy to share with her the secrets not only in cooking, but also in economic matters. Amanda was not worried about her son, whose fate seemed so clear and quite predictable to her. She hoped that Oscar would have more children to visit his grandmother, and that she would make up for the lack of communication with her many grandchildren. Amanda worked at the collective farm as an agronomist and knew a great deal about plants and the specifics of planting and harvesting. She loved her job. At one time, she even studied to be a veterinarian to help the milkmaids with their hard work. Rebecca just happened to be working in the barn. She supervised the feeding of the horned beauties who provided their whole village with delicious and healthy milk. After Charlie's arrival, when the boy was 3 years old, Amanda hinted to the young couple that it was time to have another child. The woman never gave advice because she did not like it, but she was good at hints, so that everything she said was accurate and quite streamlined. "Mrs. Amanda, what about the second baby? I'm working hard. You see how young people are leaving this godforsaken place for the big cities. There's no one to do the work. I can see that," agreed Amanda, who had just escorted her assistant to the regional center, without whom she felt as if she had no hands. "But that's no reason not to have children." "You're right, Mrs. Amanda, but I'll put it off for now," Rebecca answered. A little later, Rebecca began to talk about moving to the city herself, because she does not have enough space in her native village. "There's a store in town, and medicine is better than in our village," she explained her position. "And what about here? Cowsheds, potatoes, and how much dirt to walk to school. How's Charlie going to get there? And how have we been walking our whole lives? No aesthetics and comfort, but we went and grew up smart and decent people." Amanda tried to argue, "And Charlie will grow up just as smart, no matter whether he goes to school in rubber boots or patent leather shoes." Rebecca turned her face away resentfully, and Amanda felt her relationship with her daughter-in-law deteriorating. The young woman wanted comfort, and the lights of the big city beckoned her, and most of her girlfriends who had moved to the city told her only good things about their lives. One evening, when Amanda was about to eat dinner and then go to bed, Oscar came to see her. Her mother sensed at once that they were in for a difficult conversation. "Oscar, what's wrong?" "Mother, please stop pressuring Rebecca. She's been on my ass about you talking her out of moving in." Amanda knew exactly what was causing her son to visit her at this late hour. "What about you? Do you support her idea too? Do you want to go to town?" "I do not want to. I am happy here, except that she is my wife. I love her and should listen to her opinion. And she nags me and nags. She says about you that you are always talking about the second child. She doesn't want to. What do you want?" Amanda asked tiredly, realizing that her friendship with her daughter-in-law was over. "I want to have peace in the house. I want Rebecca to be happy, and I am ready to move in if she wants me to." "Don't you have an opinion?" asked Amanda, who was disappointed by her son's reasoning. I have. I've always had an opinion, but for my wife's sake, I'll keep it to myself. Oscar left, and Amanda realized that she would never have any more grandchildren, nor would she have a good relationship with her daughter-in-law. She would no longer go after Oscar's family, who, as it turned out, didn't even have an opinion of his own. He was a wimp, which disappointed his mother greatly. Then rumors began to circulate through the village. A new deputy chairman arrived at the collective farm and had his eye on Rebecca. The woman, who had long doubted, suddenly took the plunge. She did not hide the fact that she began a relationship on the side, and it was not easy to do it in the sparsely populated village, where everyone knows each other by sight. Oscar came to his mother again. This time he looked lost and even somewhat tearful. I can no longer tolerate Rebecca's infidelity, he told Amanda, who was also aware of her sister-in-law's adventures, and I love the bastard. Do you love yourself? Amanda asked, looking disappointedly at her son, whom she considered a strong and confident man. I don't love myself. I hate myself because I am the rag Rebecca wipes her feet on. Amanda was bitter to look at her son, who could not get up the courage to take a serious step in his life. If it were Amanda, she would have kicked the cheater out of the house long ago, taken her son away from her, and tried to make her own life. But it was not in her son's place, and so she could only speculate and speculate. Oscar did not throw Rebecca out of the house. He still hoped his wife would come to her senses and leave her vice chairman, but it wasn't to be. Not only had Rebecca not left him, but she was pregnant with her new lover and wouldn't hide it. I won't give you Charlie, Oscar screamed hysterically, and Amanda had witnessed their latest scandal, which was trumpeted throughout the village the next day. Get out with your Archie, and I will not crawl in your lap. Rebecca left the village, leaving Charlie with Oscar. She was leaving for a better life, burning the bridges of the past behind her. Her dream had come true. Now she would live in the city near an important man with whom she would have a child. Amanda was disappointed in her son again, but she couldn't help but support him. She kept coming to Oscar, saying things, but watching her son fall apart with each passing day. He ended up getting drunk. It was the ultimate downfall of Oscar in his mother's eyes. Amanda had hoped that her son would meet a woman for whom he would try to change and stop drinking. But every month, the situation worsened. 10-year-old Charlie saw the way his father behaved. He wasn't ashamed of Oscar because the boy took his father's behavior for granted. Stop drinking. Amanda yelled at her son when she found him drunk at home. Your son sees everything. You want him to follow in your footsteps. I want Rebecca to come back to me. That's all I want. When will she have had enough and come to me? When will she realize that she made a mistake that I forgave her long ago? She will not come back, answered the mother to her son, who looked completely confused and absent. He was living in his own world, where, drunk, he sat and talked for a long time with Rebecca, invisible to others' eyes, whom he saw himself in the distance. Amanda decided to take one last step toward improving his life. The woman simply packed up and drove into town to talk to her former sister-in-law. Shaking in an old bus on the way into town, Amanda had no idea what she was going to say to her daughter-in-law, but she was overwhelmed with the desire to make her son's life better. She had to do whatever she could to help Oscar, who was on the brink. Amanda found Rebecca's address fairly quickly. It was a 5-story house surrounded by cars. The non-rural views didn't scare Amanda at all, who confidently climbed to the 4th floor and rang the doorbell. Rebecca opened the door, holding a small child in her arms. Aunt Amanda, why are you here? Rebecca's eyes widened. Do you want me to kneel down? I need to save my son, and for that I am ready to crawl at your feet. Without any preamble, Amanda immediately pissed. Rebecca took a step back, and Amanda entered her former sister-in-law's house, about to really fall to her knees and beg for mercy. No, I don't want that, and I don't understand why you're going to do it. Oscar is sick, and if you don't go back to him, he'll either lose his mind or get drunk," said Amanda in a mournful voice. "I will not go back to him. I have a family. I have a son with Archie. I will have another child. I'm good with Oscar, and I miss Charlie, but I'm not going back to your son, and getting down on my knees is useless." Amanda realized that was exactly what it was. She did everything to help her son, but in her mind she knew there was nothing she could do. Oscar had chosen the path he was on. The woman returned to the village. At some point, there was an enlightenment in Oscar's life. Next to him was a woman who had tried to build a family again with Amanda's son. The humble and quiet Irene, who had come from a neighboring village to work on the collective farm, became the firefly that shone her light into Oscar's life. Amanda was glad to have such a beautiful woman by her son's side, but her joy was short-lived. Irene could not endure the humiliation that Amanda's own son repeatedly plunged her into. "What are you doing with your life? How can you just take your happiness and trample on it like that?" The mother of her son asked in horror. "You have such a wonderful woman by your side. You let yourself raise your hand against her. Do not teach me." Oscar shouted at his mother, "I don't like Irene. I hate it when she crawls in front of me, begging me to be good. That's when I want to be the bad one most of all." He was very good at it. Irene left Oscar, and his drinking became a disease that no one could cure. Oscar died in the winter, coming home drunk from a drinking buddy. Charlie was 15. He stayed with his grandmother. Amanda made another attempt to find Rebecca, telling her that her son was fatherless and very much in need of parental guidance. But Rebecca no longer lived in the apartment Amanda had visited years before. It was impossible to find her, and so the heavy teenager was left to live with her grandmother. Of course, Charlie followed in his father's footsteps. He began drinking at a young age and could not stop. Amanda was afraid of her grandson. She was not so afraid of her son because Oscar was more gentle and compliant, but Charlie fully lived up to his name, rushing into action whenever someone said something against his opinion. It wasn't easy for Amanda Diaz. She was both afraid of her grandson and worried that something might happen to him in anger, and even under the influence of alcohol. Charlie lost his temper, and it frightened her grandmother and the people around him. That evening, he went to Logan's house, taking all the money from the box. Amanda remained in her room very much frightened and told her grandson to worry about having more money in the house. "I can't get enough of your paltry pension. You just do something to make more money. But what can I do, son?" "I can't work at my age." Amanda asked her grandson in amazement. "Why can't you?" Charlie even threw up his hands in indignation. "Come on, think of something. You are the authority in the village. Let them give you a medal, and with it a bonus of some kind, and stop sitting on my neck." Amanda nodded. Even though her grandson's words about her sitting on his neck were the exact opposite of what was really going on, the woman was afraid to contradict her grandson. She was about to go to bed when someone knocked on the door. Amanda was surprised to see an unfamiliar old man on the doorstep, who looked at the woman with joy. Amanda looked the man over. He was a little older than she was, limping and leaning on a cane. He did not look dangerous, and there was no danger in driving an elderly man out at night. There were wolves and bears in the woods near their village, and it was heartless to let the old man go. "Come in," Amanda replied politely, letting the stranger in. Within an hour, she knew that the old man's name was Henry Davis. He was on his way through their village to see his daughter, who was sick and needed help. "The girl has no one but me," said Henry Davis. "Her husband has left her, and I am her only family man. My wife died 5 years ago, and Sophia never had children." Amanda treated Henry to tea and jam, and suddenly told him everything that had accumulated in her soul. The man listened, nodded silently, and frowned. Then he suddenly asked, "And where is this Charlie now?" "At a drinking buddy's house," Amanda complained. "Well, mistress, I'll be there to meet your grandson." The woman was astonished. Are you going to have a drink with him? I will teach him how to live and how to retrain him, but you just stay out of the conversation and go to bed. And in the morning when you wake up, pull yourself together." Amanda did not like the words of her new acquaintance, but for some reason she went to get a bottle and put it on the table. When Charlie returned from his guests, he was surprised to see a stranger in his house, but he didn't mind having a drink with him. Amanda listened to the conversations between the men in her bedroom. They were talking softly, and so Amanda fell asleep quietly in her room, not thinking of anything bad. She woke up in the morning, surprised that she hadn't woken up all night. She usually slept restlessly, often waking up and going out to see if her grandson was there. Putting on her robe, Amanda stepped into the room and screamed. Henry Davis was lying on the floor in the middle, a pool of blood spreading around him. Charlie, who had been asleep in a chair with his head resting on his folded arms, jumped up sharply at his grandmother's scream. A knife smeared with blood fell out of his hand. Amanda could feel her heart preparing to jump out of her chest in horror. "How could you do this?" Charlie jumped away from the old man lying on the floor. There was undisguised horror written all over his face, and his hands were shaking. He was staring at the knife. "I don't remember. It didn't happen. I couldn't have." Amanda paced around the room, remembering what had happened the night before this horrible event. Henry had said so calmly, "I'm going to teach him something," but he must have said too much to him, making the young man angry. Charlie ran out of the house and disappeared with the fence. Amanda cried loudly, wiping her face with a kitchen towel. Now this. Not only had Charlie been drinking, but he killed a man. She sobbed, and then suddenly screamed again when she heard the voice next to her. "You're overreacting, mistress." She looked up and saw Henry standing beside her. He took the towels from her hands, then began to wipe his shirt. "And give me something of your grandson's clothes. I can't go to my daughter dressed like this. Are you alive?" Amanda muttered, and the old man grinned. "I'm more alive than ever, and your Charlie won't be touching his brew for a long time. You'll have time to teach him a thing or two." "I don't understand," the woman said, still trying to recover from what had happened. "What don't you understand? That's how my own brother cured me of my drinking. He pretended to be dead and put a knife in my hand. I woke up, scared out of my wits. I wanted to jump off the bridge myself out of fear, and then I came home and my brother was sitting there laughing at me. Not a drop in my mouth since then. I said the right words to your Charlie yesterday. He'll remember them when the time comes." Amanda brought Henry a clean shirt, and then, while he ate lunch, she wiped the pig's blood off the floor, which she kept in the hall. She was amazed at how cleverly this man, whom she had not known until yesterday, had thought of everything. And what if Henry had gone to another house? What would have happened next? The old man left Amanda's house by evening, and the woman waited for her grandson. Charlie returned in the evening. He stood by the porch for a long time and was afraid to enter the house. Then he entered, silently looking around and meeting his grandmother's gaze. "Would you like some tea?" she calmly asked her grandson. They sat at the table together for a long time, drinking tea and being silent. The grandson did not ask anything about the night visitor, as if nothing had happened in their house. By morning, Logan appeared on Amanda's doorstep. The woman looked at her grandson, who shook his head negatively, talking to his friend. The next day, Charlie scurried off, and then handed Amanda the box. "I'm going to town. There's a lot of work and I'll get a job, then I'll pick you up." Amanda nodded to herself, hoping that her grandson could really change his life for the better. She didn't care if he came after her later, as long as he stopped acting the way he'd been acting in recent years, wearing himself out and his grandmother, who was the only person close to him. She walked Charlie to the bus stop and then just hugged him and wished him good luck. "I'll be back," Charlie firmly promised, and Amanda smiled through her tears. For a couple of months, she lived a quiet life. One day, she woke up and saw Charlie in the house. He smiled at Amanda and didn't look at all like the lost man he had left the village. I promised. He said, "Come on, you're coming to live with me. We're starting a new life." That's all, but there are still so many stories to tell, so subscribe to my channel, Our Days Stories. I would also appreciate your activity in the comments on this video.